Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Sorry for the slight delay. So, COVID-19 and various lockdowns and the related global recession last year has really created a very uncertain outlook for the labour market, and especially for recent graduates. And I think obviously that has accelerated the arrival of the future of work. It is claimed by so-called global experts. So if we look at the Future of Jobs report 2020 from the World Economic Forum, key findings include the following: that the pace of technology adoption is expected to remain unabated and may accelerate in some areas. And I think we've witnessed that already in higher education since the pandemic, a sector which is historically slow to adopt to new technologies. In the same report, by 2025, apparently 85 million jobs will be displaced by a shift in the division of labour between humans and machines. On average, companies estimate that around 40% of workers will require reskilling of 6 months or less, and 94% of business leaders report they expect employees to pick up new skills whilst on the job. According to the same study by WEF, closing the skills gap could add $11.5 trillion to the global economy by 2028. So we've seen many countries around the world try and align their needs with employers and the skills of graduates with variable results. I never fail to be surprised at some countries' naive and often short-term labour market interventions and a lack of real deep understanding of what's actually required by employers and how to prepare young people not for a job but for potentially several careers. Further to this, we've seen the development of perhaps unhelpful employability metrics, which really fails to grasp the difference between employability and employment. However, interestingly, the data does demonstrate near zero correlation between graduates' perceptions of their skills and qualities and actual labour market outcomes. Whilst I think it's fair to say that many students go into higher education to enhance their chances of finding a good job and develop a career, indeed in the US alone, with college tuition up by 250% since the 1990s, that has resulted in $1.6 trillion worth of student debt. So there is a strong argument that higher education has an obligation to help students get meaningful and well-paid employment. In the Gulf, despite the attempts of higher education and industry to work closer together, the reality in the Middle East, according to the PwC CEO survey this year, 39% of business leaders in the region cite lack of available skills as a critical business threat compared to a 28% worldwide. So much to discuss, much to get into. I'm delighted we've got a stellar panel to talk this through today, and I'd like them just to spend 30 seconds introducing themselves very briefly, and we'll start with Matthew.
Good morning, Cameron. Good morning to all that are participating this morning. Delighted to be here. My name is Matt Shank. I'm the President Emeritus of a liberal arts university in Arlington, Virginia, Marymount University, but currently hold the position of President of the VFIC. As you can see by my name, the VFIC is an acronym for the Virginia Foundation for Independent Colleges. So we support 16 of the 28 private universities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we can get more into that later, but again, Cameron, delighted to be here and with you.
Great to have you with us, Matt. Liesl, great to have you with us.
Well, good morning, Cameron. It's great to see you and Matt here in the studio. My name is Liesl Riddle. I am at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. I am the Vice Dean of Strategy here in the School of Business.
Liesl, great to have you with us. Stephen?
Good morning, good afternoon, as it is here. My name is Stephen Harrison-Mirfield. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for RCSI Bahrain. RCSI is the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, so as our name would suggest, we emanate from Ireland and from Dublin. We are an independent university based here in Bahrain, but with a very strong transnational education relationship with our mother campus back in Dublin. It's a delight to be with everybody today.
Great to have you with us, Stephen. And last but not least, Abhilasha.
Thanks, Cameron. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from United Arab Emirates. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Abhilasha, and I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs at American University in Emirates. We are located in Dubai International Academic City.
Great to have you with us. Look, we've got a lot to cover. Let's get straight into it. My first question, and I'll start with you, Matt. Is the role of universities, and this is a kind of a philosophical question here, is the role of universities to prepare students for employment, and are universities really in danger of becoming job factories?
Cameron, as I thought about this and the way that you have positioned this and the conference has positioned it, it's just such a great question, because historically and still today, there's a huge tension between the idea of pure education, as we like to think about it at colleges and universities, and I'll call it pure employment on the other hand. And so we actually need to get through this tension, because both are important. And as you think about this, the tension between education and employment varies dramatically depending on the type of institution that you are serving. And so I mentioned in my introduction, I was the president of a liberal arts university, and now run a foundation that supports liberal arts universities. And you can imagine they're probably at one end of the spectrum in terms of believing more about the power of pure education versus career readiness. On the other hand, they've had to adjust and adapt just to survive and thrive. One thing that your participants and listeners may probably know, but a third of the CEOs in the US and the Fortune 500 have liberal arts degrees. So it's not like if you have a degree in liberal arts, you're going to be shut out from meaningful work. So if you looked at one end of the spectrum here in the US, where you have liberal arts universities, and then if you looked at the other end of the spectrum, perhaps are the two-year schools, the community and technical colleges, which typically have a very, very strong focus on career. So depending on type of institution, there's a tension. And then, of course, depending on the stakeholder that we're talking about, there's an equally important tension to get over. And again, as you know and can imagine, the faculty have their views on education versus career preparedness. Parents have their views, especially if they're paying the tuitions that are rising that you mentioned earlier. Students have their views, donors have their views. So it's a really interesting tension that exists that we have to get over. The one thing I would just say is this question about education versus employment, we like to think about it as a dichotomy. You have to be either one or the other. But I hope what we get into today is the idea that it's really an integration of these things, and we have to do both better, not just one or the other. And I'll leave it at that for now and let my other panelists chime in.
Thanks, Matt. Abhilasha, let me ask you, in the UAE, it's a different dynamic over there. Students, I would imagine most of your students are probably from expats background, therefore you've got perhaps a different audience. How do you see it over there? How's your university? How do you view this tension between employment and the role of universities?
Thank you, Cameron, for asking that question, and I completely agree with Professor Shank. So we are also, our curriculum is American curriculum, so there is a definitely strong focus on liberal arts. If you ask, I mean, honestly, what I think is certainly one of the primary goals of higher education system is to prepare students for workforce. And I understand the ongoing debate to whether the university programs are adequately providing students with 21st century skills or not. And I also understand the rapidly changing ecosystem of higher education with more and more non-traditional students. So we also have, our students are in the age group, some of them are in the age group of around 30 to 40. So we are having non-traditional students, which is basically the norm everywhere. But I would like to emphasize that higher education institutions are constantly adapting to maintain the practical utility of their courses and programs through a number of strategies. I mean, we are also opening the door for opportunities and not only focusing on handing over the degrees, but also helping students to build their own self-awareness, outlining like why the students are learning what they learn, providing them work integrated learning opportunities through internships, and adding and getting the students also out into the real world, fostering collaboration, showing students how to learn from their mistakes, having a kind of building kind of trust between professor and students, and also encouraging the students to get out of their comfort zone. We teach them to appreciate their own lives while also contributing to their community to enhance others. So the graduates here also are aware of employability and lifelong learning after skill focused and very diverse education. And as university, we support our students as they follow their academic interest and passion for learning. Let me also tell you that we at our university, we are a private institution, but we have close to 50% Emirati population. So university experiences actually help students to build confidence and develop the skill set that helps the students to stand, in a labor market which is amplified by technology and rapidly evolving demands from the employers. So it's basically what I feel like universities are inculcating, and we are also inculcating hard and soft skills among students so that they can adapt to the future of work, and especially considering that in the coming 5 years, the present cohort of students will be taking probably the jobs that do not exist at the moment, and so we are preparing the students for future. One more thing which I would like to focus here is that there may be a gap between what students learn in university and what they are actually expected to know in order to be job ready. But this does not mean that universities have turned into job factories. Rather, what we are doing is we are aligning our teaching methodologies with the current time, where innovation, creativity, technology, and problem solving and other 21st century skills are incorporated into the teaching so that the students are ultimately benefited and they are able to cope with the future challenges.
I mean, that's very helpful, and I thank you for that. I mean, we'll come into a bit more detail later when we talk about UAE specifically. I would say at this point, all available data shows there's a lot of work to be done with the higher education sector in particular, and there's a big gap that exists in many different metrics regarding employability, research and innovation, but we'll come on to that later. It's interesting now to move to Stephen, a very interesting case of a medical university, so a very specific niche area. Stephen, what's your view from RCSI?
So I guess a couple of things really from my perspective. One is I come from a commercial background initially. I'm a sociology graduate, so not a healthcare graduate, but we are a designated specific healthcare institution. And the reality, as you pointed out earlier, Cameron, is education is getting more expensive. Certainly if people are doing a medicine degree, it might be the second most expensive thing they invested in their life after the mortgage. So parents expect and students expect a return on investment. And I know my daughter's gone to university now and it costs a lot of money, and that return on investment is often measured by employment. So I think, going back to Matt's point, it's critical that there's a healthy marriage of kind of the academic and the employability side of things, and that they're not two dichotomous things. For RCSI, employability is pretty much everything. We here in RCSI Bahrain, we educate doctors and we educate nurses. Those students at the end of their course have to be competent practitioners. We cannot afford for them to be going into the workplace and put any patient at risk whatsoever. So the employability side of things is massively important. But I don't think that really means that we have to turn out mass-produced clones. For me, the really important thing is that we produce inquisitive and open-minded graduates, people that are prepared to kind of look outside of the norm and are not blinkered. And I think Abhilasha mentioned there, a commitment to lifelong learning. So when they leave university, they don't see it as the end of the journey for their education. They see it as the springboard to the next level. And I think that's particularly critical in terms of healthcare. For me, I think universities have a moral obligation as well to produce highly employable graduates. But in a very holistic and enlightened way. It's not about ticking boxes saying, yeah, they can do this amount of coding or that or whatever else. We're talking about the way that they look at the world, the way that they challenge things, the way that they structure essays that can be then transitioned into an employability situation. I'll give you an example. I used to work, when I first left university, I worked in the computer games industry. This was back in the late 1990s. And we loved recruiting graduates. And the reason that we loved recruiting graduates is because they didn't know what was impossible. So you had an industry that was very fast moving, very fast paced. The technology today wouldn't be the technology that was there in a year's time. And if anything, that's kind of expedited as time's gone on. But what you often have is people that have been working in the industry for 10 years and they kind of say, no, you can't do that because we've tried that before. But actually the technology's moved on so much that these fresh graduates coming in were kind of saying, well, I want to challenge that. I want to do something there. So the whole notion, they didn't know what was impossible. So they constantly push the boundaries. And I think education, higher education has got a real responsibility to teach that to the students, to continually push the boundaries. And research is such a critical part of that, because it's through research that we push the boundaries. It's through research that we develop the curriculum that are going to be taught in the future years. So it's really important that students leave in that knowledge. And kind of coming back to a comment I made at the beginning, I'm a sociology graduate, so I graduated a few years ago. And when I graduated, you know, I knew full well that I was never going into a career in academia in sociology, but I still think to this very day I use the skills that my undergraduate degree taught me. Always questioning, you know, never accepting what was the norm, learned never to read and trust the media. And I started my career in HR, I moved into consulting, and now I'm kind of in a position where I'm running a university in the Middle East. So it's given me that adaptability, that variability. It hasn't, I never did a healthcare program which led me down a particular route. I did a more holistic kind of program that gave me many options. But I just think that all those skills, basing my decisions on rock solid research and looking into things, collaborating with others for better results. I think if that's what a job factory is, then I'd be very happy to be educated in the job factory, because it's teaching more than just a linear approach to things.
Cameron, if I could interrupt for just a second. I know we need to move on, but something that Stephen said and Professor Singh said really speaks to me, and that is, when we talk about career preparedness, the things that Stephen's mentioning in his sociology degree, communication skills, written and oral communication skills, decision-making, the quantitative reasoning, all these things are hugely important to employers when we ask them, what do you want in our graduates? So people too often outside of higher ed think if you're training somebody in accounting, they're not getting these other things that are equally important. So I just wanted to make that point because Professor Singh and Stephen also kind of raised it, but put it out there more firmly.
Thanks, Matt. I mean, yeah, you're right about, you know, let's say important 21st century skills. I often think to myself, how did the great inventors and painters of the 19th century survive without 21st century skills? But anyway, we bring it back. I'd like to draw in Liesl now. We've looked at things from a pretty high level view. Let's get down to the practicalities. Your institution, how are you responding to the growing demands of employability of traditional and non-traditional students? And in particular, how are you engaging with the often badly done aspect of industry engagement?
Well, thanks for that question. I mean, it's something we've been giving a lot of thought to. I think really institutions of higher education really need to completely rethink how they manage and leverage their social capital. I think if you look at sort of the organizational structures of most universities, they have a donor and alumni relations team, right? That's the externally facing organization that really interacts with the university's social capital. But for what? for gifts of treasure. But increasingly, what our students need first and foremost are gifts of time and talent from those individuals to better understand what those needs are out in the so-called real world, and help them sort of plan what they're going to do inside the academy. And so what we've grown actually at George Washington University is a group, a staff team that is totally dedicated to global and experiential education. So this staff team is in charge of brokering those relationships between the donors, the alumni relations folks, the local employers that are working with our Career Center, and our faculty and our student services, so that when we are putting on events outside in the co-curricular space, we actually have social capital that we can draw upon readily for that type of outside the classroom education that sits in that mesospace between going and getting a job and how do I write a cover letter, how do I write a resume, and the actual classroom learning. There's a lot about learning about sort of occupational socialization that takes place in those co-curricular situations. And we need to better leverage the relationships that we have to build those types of meaningful exchanges for our students in the co-curricular space. And similarly, in the curricular space, being able to bring real live hands-on projects into the classroom from that social capital to allow students to not just have an internship, but actually a guided learning experience where they are taught how to bridge the theory and the methods into a real world application. But you can't do any of this, I think, without truly investing in the infrastructure, because this relationship building and bringing these stakeholders together in ways that traditionally aren't usually together in the institution of higher ed, it's painstaking, but it's well worth it.
Great points, Liesl. Infrastructure, turning theory into practice, work-related, work-based learning, really interesting stuff. Stephen, your university, I believe, has students or representation from over 40 countries around the world. How are you responding through your through unique approaches within your institution?
So we have well, over the time that we've been going since 2004, we've had 51 different nationalities attended RCSI Bahrain, and now working in 36 different countries. So we are in our medicine faculty, 55% of our students are international. So it's a fairly significant proportion of students that come from overseas. So we have to focus on a more global approach to kind of employability, I suppose. You know, we're kind of not just fitting into one local kind of parameter, I suppose. But again, going back to the point I made earlier, our premise is work-ready graduates. They've got to go in there, and particularly in healthcare, it's the duty of care. So we need to be engaging with clinical partners to find out what the prerequisite skills are that they require. You know, and I've got to be honest, they've changed a little bit over the last couple of years. The COVID pandemic has changed things dramatically. You know, so whereas previously you might have a limited number of people that went into emergency medicine or ICU, at the moment, that's been a huge thing in terms of people wanting to go through. So we need to engage with those, and I guess we engage on a number of different levels. So from an employer perspective, we speak to the employers, and every 2 years we do a survey of all the employers that our students go to. We're quite good because we're not very old. We know all our alumni, we know where they're working and everything else. And we send out surveys to these employers to find out how good are our students compared to the other students they're taking in. Well, not students, obviously, there'll be residents and foundation year entrants and that sort of thing. What do they do well? Do they want them to continue doing? And what do they not do too well that they'd like to see improve? And what's the new things that they'd like to see? And, the feedback that we get from that is very good, which validates what we're doing, but equally it informs what we're doing as well, because it gives us a better insight into where we are. Another really critical area of feedback and ways to improve employability, and Liesl touched on it, is the alumni. As I say, we since 2004 we've had 2,500 graduates. I think of that 2,500 graduates, we know where 2,480 of them are. So there's only about 20 that we can't find, having traveled across the world, sort of thing. But we speak to them and say to them, guys, what have we done right that's prepared you for the workplace? And what have we not done so right that you would like us to see us to change and feed through to the students here? And they're superb in terms of giving us that feedback and giving us that insight. But they're giving us it from a different perspective. They're giving it from an employee as opposed to an employer perspective. But there's a whole piece that we can do throughout the student journey, which is around the careers department. So with healthcare, as with any career really, you know, you need to be spending your time throughout your undergraduate years building up your experience, building up your CV. You're not going to be able to go in and say, I've worked for 5 years in this hospital and 3 years in that. But so they're looking at things that differentiate. And our careers department has a big focus on student electives. So we have formal agreements with something in the region of 45 universities around the world, which guarantee our students electives at those universities. The US, Canada are a big place, but equally across in Taiwan, in Singapore, in Japan, Australia, the UK, and of course across the Middle East as well. So that's a really important thing. And there's elements of our course that make that mandatory. So there's 2 times that they have to do a mandatory elective. But if everybody's doing only 2 mandatory electives, where's the differentiator? So we have voluntary electives as well, which they kind of do through the summer and everything else. One of the things I would always say to a medicine student is once you've started, there's no holidays. You know, you're kind of prepping yourself all the way through, and there's no long summer breaks. So that's really important. And then I guess the other thing that we do, which I think is, I like it because I think it really prepares our students really well, but there's also kind of an emotional side for me as well, which is our international community engagement activities. So we have a community engagement department here, and through a number of different charities, we send our students abroad to less well-developed countries where they won't have the specialists in pediatric surgery or that sort of thing. We have access to those people, and we pay for them to go abroad. So one of our pediatric oncology surgeons went to Vietnam with 5 or 6 of our students, and they went to observe and support him in terms of the operations that he was doing there, which are like massively complex in comparison to what would happen normally. And the students then come back and do a presentation to us here in RCSI Bahrain as part of a condition of traveling. And to see their presentations and what they've learned from that experience is phenomenal. It's way better than them kind of just going across to the hospital away across the road here, because they're kind of seeing a whole different perspective of life, and it's given them a greater skill set, particularly empathy, which is so critical in healthcare. So I think there's a whole host of things that universities can do. I'm obviously talking now from a healthcare perspective, which is kind of a bit more preordained, I suppose, in terms of the various things, but you can turn that to a multitude of different things.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And I mean, it's fair to say that within the region, your employability reputation is probably the highest in terms of medical schools. I'm going to move to Abhilasha now in Dubai. Lovely city, great city. Lived there for 2 years. Here's the problem statement: 3 million population, 65 higher education institutions. What sets you apart in terms of your approach to employability? What makes you different?
Thank you, Cameron, for that. So let me start from here that one thing which pandemic has taught us is that especially in education, there is no more concept of one size fits all, because students' needs are different. So students need very flexible, very harmonious and personalized educational experience. So certain responsibilities that we are inculcating in graduates to assist in the development of work-ready skills are preparing them to face complicated, unknown and known situations using deep learning approaches to enhance the self-development of students and preparing them for lifelong learning, increasing their awareness and knowledge of workplace environment, assisting them with career management and self-management skills to develop well-rounded graduates. We use student committees, student clubs, councils, events, and diversity in the university environment to help graduates develop social and cultural skills for international workplace. In the teaching and learning space, we use industry engagement to assure better employability of students, supporting innovation, quality research, and meaningful engagement that contributes to the public good. We last year we also integrated certification program, and so that to achieve this, basically focusing on more contextualized learning and authentic assessment, I should say. We strongly believe that higher education and industry both are integral and interdependent parts of the economy. So they work together, I mean, synergically to provide an engine for economic growth. So we, first of all, institutional strategy to engage expertise of career advisors and professionals at program and course level to ensure that the students are exploring and applying the knowledge related to self and career as foundational elements of their program. They are having authentic learning experience that incorporates, let us say, critical reflection, ensuring that emerging capabilities are evident through the use of the framework which we are using. University programs which we are delivering are reflecting professional practice, and educators are basically supporting, and they are also becoming more industry aware and more pedagogically speaking more proficient. So we try to position ourselves in a way by using more and more learning analytics as well. Tracking the student behavior. So we have our learning management system, which tracks basically the student behavior and the development of employability capabilities and competencies. So these are some of the things which we are utilizing here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Matt, I often come across universities and their approach is, well, we'll go talk to some employers and we'll just rejig the curriculum, and then all of a sudden we'll be able to produce graduates that are ready for employment. But we all know that it's a bit more complex than that. And, this kind of holistic institutional approach really does rely on the fundamentals of higher education, of good quality teaching, innovative pedagogy, and assessment, as well as what Liesl has talked about before in terms of real world experiences. From your institution, what are you doing specifically regarding teaching, regarding curriculum, regarding student assessment?
Right. So before I just jump into that, I wanted to add that Professor Singh, I happen to be, and this wasn't preordained, I'm on the board of AUE, and I have never seen a university that is more industry focused in terms of their academic programming. They have programs that virtually would appeal to all workforce development and industries in Dubai and really around the world. So I compliment them, not only because of Professor Singh, but also because of the work that they've done. So I just wanted to throw that in there. It's a great institution. Now, you asked me about my institution. I can speak to some of my former institutions, but right now I'm the president of a foundation that supports 16 of the institutions. So what I would tell you there as the former president of one of these institutions, we haven't really talked about this, but you really, before it gets to the faculty level and the curriculum level, there has to be the buy-in from the senior administration. So if the president, the provost, the other VPs at the institution, the deans don't believe in this, and that holds true for anything that the university is trying to accomplish, it's just not going to happen. But typically those people are more interested in that connection to the job market because they know it's important for the university's health. So you typically do have that buy-in at various levels from senior administration. But as you mentioned, or we've mentioned throughout this, the most challenging issue is really getting the faculty on board. And again, I was a former faculty member before I moved into administration, and I was the dean of a business school. So I was in a business school, and it's hard to believe, but there are faculty within the business school which would obviously have a logical connection to the job market and industry that still don't believe in this. And so we've got to stay away from the notion of thinking that everybody is on board here and trying to really get everybody on board. The points that I would make quickly, just to reinforce some of the other things that have been said, is that from a faculty perspective, from a curricular perspective, you don't have to change the content that you're delivering. You don't necessarily have to change how it's being delivered. You just have to take a minute for the students and tie things that you're saying back to the career world and how it's going to help you in your future career. So I want to stop and pause for a second, because that's a really important but difficult thing. You would think that's a quick thing for faculty to do. If I'm talking about a particular area of, no matter what the discipline, it should be very seamless to just say, and this is how it's going to help you in your career. But as a former faculty and having led faculty for many years, that often doesn't happen. So that's where the deans and the department heads and the upper administration really has to come in and say, this is important that you do this. I don't care how you do it, but I want you to integrate career into everything that you're teaching. So the other things that have been mentioned before, again, from a curricular standpoint, many of our institutions have required internships before students graduate, which is fantastic. Many of our institutions have experiential learning with real cases involving real industry and real businesses, which is fantastic. We've talked about how getting industry professionals engaged in the curriculum design early is important. So all these things are important, but I think the central point I'd make before I turn it back over to you is that we have to remember that it has to be integrated and everybody has to be on board, not just the president, the provost, the deans. Everybody at the university has to be thinking, how do I integrate what I do into helping our students gain meaningful employment? So I hope that answers the question.
That's great. It's great. It's a great response. Totally agree with the integrated approach. Liesl, listen, just picking up on that, coming back to your institution, and it's something that perhaps we haven't picked up on, or it already gets mentioned actually when we talk about employability, but also about how do we also focus on the learners' attitude and their values and their behaviours. We tend to focus a lot on skills and the technical skills and the knowledge required, but unless you've got those attitudes and behaviours to support it, often the outcomes aren't as good. But it'd be great to hear from your perspective on how things operate.
Well, thanks for that good question. I mean, I think we need to do a lot more listening, right, to our learners up front in the placement process. I think so often when we're trying to do recruiting, we're trying to get that student in and just sort of land them, but we need to make sure we're doing enough intensive data collection up front about what the students' attitudes are, what their expectations are, and what their unique interests are, so that later, once they're actually in the system, then that the advising teams have access to this to be able to help better bring that student along and help promote retention. So I think investing in more upfront investments in the systems of recruitment and admission gives us a lot of interesting data to start to then draw upon in aggregate as we build forward in our programs at the aggregate level, at the program level, but also down at the individual student level.
And that's really interesting. And I just want to take that on a bit further to Abhilasha. Obviously you're a university or an institution doing remarkable work in the UAE, but there is this big push that we've noticed. Microcredentials, for example, and professional certification. How do you see that unfolding within your own institution? And does it actually add real value to improving student outcomes regarding employment?
Okay. So first of all, let me just share with you that we realize the need to shift from a very traditional to contemporary means of teaching. So that the students, they are, it allows the students to adequately explore other learning possibilities, which is basically self-directed learning, because even the micro-credentials will not work, self-paced learning, small group learning, problem-based learning. So we redesigned the curriculum to offer such opportunities to the learners, and so that they are having the relevant skills in specific careers, which students want to qualify. So any relevant curriculum is designed by university to provide students with that set of competencies which are required by the labor market. So we are incorporating programs, certifications, micro-credentials, which allows to further pursue the study in a specialized field. Now, just to give you some example that, for example, in business, College of Business, we do have College of Business, and we offer like marketing, accounting, finance, HR. So these programs are what we offer. Sometime we align our curriculum with professional association like Society for SHRM. The professors also, we emphasize that they should be either SHRM qualified or CIPD qualified. Once the students, they complete their program, whether it is in marketing, for example, for marketing, it is SEMA, for logistics, for hospital and healthcare management. So all these, we align our curriculum with this professional credentials. So which is designed for students to build in demand career skill. So the goal is to develop a kind of academic mindset and culture and providing real-time support and taking like a T-shaped approach to knowledge, which we disseminate, which refers to a broad set of skills which are needed for tomorrow's workforce. So focus is more on outcome-based teaching, which is integrated in each course to inculcate the KSAs, the knowledge, the skills, and abilities which are in high demand. So basically equipping the students with the skills that make them marketable.
Great, and I'll just bring in Liesl here. I mean, your institution has obviously got a view on micro-credentials. What's your take on it?
Well, about 3 years ago, we undertook a pretty vast assessment from our employers about what kinds of knowledge and skills and abilities that they felt we needed to be doing a better job of socializing with our students. And once we kind of got that list, we then looked back at our curriculum. Where are those things in the curriculum? What are some courses we need to add? Where are some of those courses elsewhere in the university? And then we set about creating, now we have 27 different graduate certificates. They're all 12 credit hours, 4 courses each, and they are fully stackable into all of our degree programs. Some of those certificates come from exclusively School of Business courses. Some of them come from other colleges within the university. Others are combinations. But they each take the learner on a full package learning journey, from theory in a given area, some methods, and then an application. The graduate certificates can be taken standalone, right? So they can just be that you get a credential in and of itself. You can stack it into and count it towards as a sort of a specialization in any one of our degree programs, or you can stack them on top of themselves. We have a new master's in interdisciplinary business studies, where you can take 2 very different types of skill areas and blend them together for your own sort of unique stamp for the marketplace. So I feel like in many ways, these graduate certificates, this model helps us better work across the institution, because 4 courses can marry with other 4 courses in really interesting ways across the university. I think number one. Number two, I think in many ways it's helped our faculty get a better sense of what are employers really looking for and how to kind of put together learning journeys, I think, that speak more directly at that in a more micro-credentialing way.
Thanks, Liesl. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there's an argument for many parts of the world where the credentials aren't stacking. So there's a lot of things to figure out yet. But I think that's an interesting way to look at things and do things. I want to quickly move things along now. We've got 10 minutes left. But here's an interesting topic: equity. So when we talk about employability, are we really focusing on marginalized parts of society, low income students, people with learning disabilities? How are you dealing with that? Matt, in your view, are universities doing a good job, or is there still much to be done?
Much to be done for sure, and obviously a very, very important and hot topic in the US right now in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We absolutely know that underrepresented students, and those can be defined, any number of ways. In the US, we define underrepresented as first generation, could be veterans, it could be students of color, it could be LGBTQ. So many different ways to define it, but we know that they're not getting the mentoring informally and formally that some of our other students enjoy just from the circumstances that they grow up in. So one very quick example of what we're doing is every program that we put on, collaborative program at the VFIC, where we try to get all 16 universities to participate. Every program that we do it within the lens of DEI. So we just developed a program called Career Preparedness for Underrepresented Students, and the universities nominated underrepresented students, and we have speakers come in and talk about some of the skills that Liesl mentioned earlier, like networking, resume writing, things that aren't specific content to a particular industry, but just good skills for students to have. And we know that these students don't get them if they're underrepresented. So hot topic, important topic, have to do more.
Liesl, are you doing anything in particular to support these students?
We partner with a great organization called the Posse Foundation. They're based in the United States out of New York, and they search through secondary education throughout the United States to identify groups of students that then universities like ours partner with to bring in a cohort of students that support one another, and then also serve as partners with the institution to help really lead DEI change within the organization. I think working with the Posse Foundation has been transformative for our university, our school in particular.
And Stephen, often people think Bahrain, oil-rich country. I've lived there for several years. Not the truth, is it? A lot of disadvantaged young people. How are you supporting these young people?
I think one of the really key things for me to kind of point out is I feel as a transnational education provider that we've got a moral obligation to educate the indigenous population of the countries that we work in. As I mentioned earlier, Bahrain has 55% of its students are Bahraini. The School of Nursing, for example, a lot of our students would come from a lower socio-economic background. We work with the government in regards to kind of sponsoring them. We developed our own scholarship programs as well. We also work with people such as Mubarak Al Khalifa, the Rashid Al Zayani Foundation, and the Isa bin Salman Charitable Trust to provide wider access to students from all backgrounds. And I think, for us, one of the things I'm most proud of about Bahrain, of our 2,500 graduates, 1,500 of them are working here in Bahrain. They're Bahraini graduates working here in Bahrain. So we're contributing to the economy, we're contributing to the development of the indigenous population and kind of supporting them through. It's not always easy in terms of finding that financial support and everything else. I think, education from Europe wouldn't be traditionally one that kind of had a lot of strong links on the alumni side of things and that side of things. So it's something that we're kind of working on and working with government entities, the charitable trusts, and as our alumni grows, our alumni as well as increasing the access. But as I say, we do focus on that indigenous education.
Keep up the good work. Thanks. We've got 5 minutes left. I want to just get through a couple of quick questions. Quick one for anyone, really. Obviously, technology is playing a huge role in terms of helping young people, well, not just young people, but all parts of society, upskill, reskill for the world of work. How are your institutions using technology to support learners? And that's open for anyone.
One of the things that we're kind of doing, and I guess it's supporting the employability as opposed to kind of the learner side of things, is we are now using blockchain technology. And actually, credit should go to Cameron for introducing me to the whole kind of block search side of things. But particularly for medicine and healthcare, where certs are huge, not just in the education piece, but also the postgraduate qualifications and that sort of stuff. We're kind of driving that through, and the students absolutely love it. They understand it so well; it makes their life so much easier, and is a big part. As I say, not directly linked to the learning side of things, but certainly the credential.
Time for one more on the technology, if anyone wants to pick up.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I mean, we're big on online education at George Washington University, and I think a lot of schools can put things online, as we've seen from COVID, but not a lot of schools can put it online well. We invested many years ago in our own in-house instructional design team, headed by several PhD instructional designers and their support team. And it's wonderful. Our faculty can come right into the studio that day when there's breaking news, make some content and get it out there. But our program is fully committed also to making sure our students aren't just learning asynchronously and passively, that there are intentional synchronous elements and hands-on elements even through our online programs.
I mean, I would urge anyone today who wants to see what world-class online education looks like to go to the George Washington University and have a look. I mean, it is really outstanding, world-class. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I want to come to because obviously it's obviously focusing on the Gulf. Abhilasha, here's another problem statement for you. Only 4% of the private sector are Emirati, and obviously the UAE government has an ambitious plan to increase that over the next 10 years. How are you guys going to do it? What's the challenge? It's a big challenge. How are you guys going to overcome it? And what's your, we know about the great work that your institution's doing, but it's still a big mountain to climb.
Thanks, Cameron, for that question. It's really relevant, but especially when we see the demography of UAE, where, as you mentioned, that expats are almost 88% of the total population, and Emiratis comprise, I think, around 11% of the total population. So the government identified that there is a lack of national workers in the private sector, which is leading to a kind of critical skill gap and knowledge gap at the same time. Especially when, for example, Emirati workers are only working in government organization, the country's labor force, it was lacking the breadth of experience. So what the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization, they came up with, in partnership with Ministry of Education and universities. So they have launched a program called Wajihni, which is a national program for field training and summer work. And it's a part of the Emiratization 360 initiative. It's one of the initiative which is aimed at educating the Emirati youth so that they understand that the working in the private sector is becoming critical now. And we can see that gradually, like for us in the university also, we always provide the benefits and advantages to all our Emirati students, and we offer them more and more opportunities actually when we bring companies to the university. So we are basically empowering the Emiratis so that they are employed in the private sector. And this is in line with the needs of the labor market and the requirements of the future job. So this initiative is basically a part of the national strategy, and then which was, I think, launched in 2030. And then later on, it was integrated in 2071 plan with 4 major pillars when it was released. And recently they launched 10 principles for the next 50 years. So I know that it is very, it's really, I cannot say it is difficult to achieve, because the country is focusing on becoming a knowledge economy. And it is important to note that one of the pillars which they have taken is basically excellent education. It is one of the critical pillars out of the 4 pillars. So we all are supporting this government's initiative and linking academia and the labor market.
I mean, good luck, best of luck to you all. I mean, Emiratisation is a key policy for the country. I think you're doing a great job. So it's going to take time. Cautionary tale, always about jobs for the future. Had we listened to what WEF said 5 years ago, we'd be producing hundreds of thousands of drone experts or drone engineers, I think. So cautionary tale always. Listen, last minute, we've talked through so much today. Holistic approach, integrated approach, real world learning, micro-credentials, the use of technology. Employability is not going away. It's a hot topic. People want jobs. There's a lot of student debt to pay off. In one sentence, what's your reflection on today and the way forward? And we'll start with Liesl.
Start having new conversations. Bring your stakeholders closer together.
Stephen?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And not just kind of employability conversations with employers, but also between institutions as well. I think we've got a joint responsibility to kind of share that knowledge that's so critical, and it is really important that we learn from each other.
Abhilasha?
I think education is not about earning. It's about learning. It may not be possible to predict all the jobs of the future, but universities can help to ensure that the students find accomplishment in the jobs they choose to do.
Wonderful. Matt, final words with you.
Yeah, I would echo other comments and just, again, applaud all my panelists. I would say that integration is key throughout the entire university, and every university should have success in the workplace as a goal. We should have common metrics for how we measure that, and it has to be beyond how much students are earning and how many of our alums have jobs. So I'll leave it at that, but great conversation.
I just want to thank all the panelists today. I think you've been a marvelous panel to work with. I hope all the viewers who've tuned in to watch this have learned something. And surely, when we talk about higher education, no one ever remembers what job you did, but surely the life that you led. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.